Hello there, my name is John Fortin with Interseed.com. Welcome to today's MyID Espresso session where we're going to look at installing and configuring MyID. Let me pop up a slide for the agenda here. And what we're going to do today is we're looking at installing MyID, and we're going to concentrate on a single server install. MyID is a modern three-tier application that you could install in various different ways that are probably beyond the scope of this presentation today. What I want to do is take really a high-level view of how to install MyID and the general steps around that. And first I wanted to talk about sort of the ethos around the MyID installation process and the tools available. We basically have a secure by default kind of ethos where we basically make sure that all the moving parts of MyID are installed in the most secure kind of way. And part of the knock-on effect of that, of course, is that the installation itself is more complicated than it usually is. It's not a sort of next kind of process, because there's lots of settings you need to set up in the Windows Server environment to make sure that all the various parts are secure. So that's sort of the overall sort of picture. So we're going to look at how to prepare the server only, basically. We're not going to look at the client-side applications at the moment. They're fairly easy to install. They're basically the next kind of thing. The key thing is to get the server installed properly and things around that. And the process is basically to look at the installation guide and go through the steps there that are outlined in quite a detailed way. And then as a backup to that, we have this system interrogation utility called the SIU, which is basically an automated sort of back test of the installation things that you've done and make sure that everything is configured properly before you actually do the install of MyID. So that's the process. I wanted to give you an idea of how that looks and what it's about, so that you go ahead and start your own installation of MyID. So the SIU is basically a manual process, and then it's a process where you can be given a number of potential problems, and then you go and fix them manually yourself. And in the future, we're going to be looking at including the MyID installation assistant, which does a very similar process, and then it will actually run commands on your system to fix whatever the underlying problem is. So basically a semi-automated or even fully automated process where you can just say run all the scripts to fix the situation. And that might be the subject of a future video. So let's dive in. If I bring up the MyID, and we're going to go through basically two sections, briefly sort of skim over what they're talking about. So here you've got the section 3, the hardware requirements, and that basically outlines for you basically what you need to know in terms of what hardware you need to set up MyID, what the operating systems are, what the databases are, and you go through and sort that out. And the fourth chapter here, the preparing your system, we'll have a brief look at as well. And the key one here is probably setting up the user accounts. So MyID runs on a number of user accounts that need to be set up to keep the system secure in all its various bits. So there's the installation account where you'll be running the install. There's the Com Plus account, which is the internal application server account that runs most of MyID. There's the website, so on the web server there's a separate account that has separate privileges. So that's outlined as well, so you need to create user accounts for that. And then there's the web services account, separate from that. And then finally there's the MyID authentication server account, which again runs in a separate service account you set up within your Active Directory environment. And SQL Server as well, various ways to deploy that, but you need to basically create accounts and give privileges to that user to be able to create databases and things like that. So that's a brief look at the process. And now I wanted to show you basically what the SIU looks like, and run that to show you, give you an idea what it's like. Right, so here we have the MyID server running as a virtual machine on my laptop here. And we've created all the, gone through all the prereqs in the PDF document. We've created all the accounts. And now we want to run the system interrogation utility, which is basically distributed with the MyID server installation. So you just basically copy that directory and you install it using a bat file here, install.siu. And then when you want to run it, you run this BAT file here, SIU interactively. And so let me just set these up so we can see them working. So the SIU is loaded. It took a little bit of time there to load. Because it's pulling up the past installation that I've done, the past run of this SIU. So all these details have been saved from the previous run. When you first run the SIU, you can load up example runs here. So depending on how you're configuring MyID, what kind of number of tiers you're using, etc. So what I've done is basically a single tier example, and I've modified these inputs here. So you go ahead and you specify the machines that everything's running on. So it's all of this is running on a single VM, including IIS, the web server. You then set up the user accounts. So I've set up all the service accounts that I talked about in the PDF document. And then we go and point it to the right databases and tell IIS where to look for its website, etc. Then we basically start this test, and it will basically run through now and run these tests. There's quite a few of them. There's several hundred that it's doing in the background. It takes a little while, but it's basically going through all the tiers of the system and checking various things as per the prereqs and as per our experience with how MyID should be run. So it's already done 50 tests, and it'll go through a couple of hundred there, as you'll see. And then what's basically going to happen is it generates documentation in the form of an HTML files. There's two kinds of files it creates. One's called verbose, so lots of information. One is a bit more summarized, and we'll have a look at the verbose option once it's complete here, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things and how it's organized, and then follow through one example error that's going to come up, and we'll then just give you an idea, a flavor of what the installation is like. Almost done now. There it goes. Just finishing the run. Generally HTML files, and here we have our two tabs here. One's the verbose I mentioned, one's the redacted version. So it's basically a report. It's a table of contents, what it's talking about, describes the test, how many tests it ran. So there's 253 at the moment in this version. It sits back the configuration options that you gave it earlier in that screen. And then it goes through the main issues that it's found. The most important are at the beginning. So here we're talking about several fails and things that are broken that aren't right. Then it goes on to show you the warnings, things that might need your attention, you need to make a judgment about. And then the full test results are basically all the things that tested, things that passed, things that didn't pass, etc. So if we go back now to the failures, let's just pick one of them. So the first one is basically got a reference here back into the PDF document. So SIU 071. So if I go back to the PDF now, and if I do a search for SIU 71, I can then, that takes me directly to the thing that I may have missed, and then I can read the error message and and find out what I've missed. It's complaining about something that some privilege that the common user doesn't have. So you'd have to go back and fix that manually in terms of going through the Windows server screens to fix that. And that's basically the key things I wanted to show you, basically, the overall process. Let me pop up my slide here. We ran the SIU utility, and I could lead to the future where we're looking at something called the MyID Installation Assistant to be able to automate the process of fixing these problems, to do that either one by one manually, or to run a set of scripts that will do all the things for you under the covers. Some sysadmins want to know what's being done to their system, which is quite understandable. So we allow people to see what the scripts are actually doing before they're actually run. So it's up to the sysadmin and the installation person to decide what's best for them in their given situation. And that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this MyID Espresso. Hopefully enough time to have your espresso. And we'll see you next time, maybe to show you the MyID Installation Assistant. Many thanks. Thank you.